We are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us. I like talking about this kind of stuff as a journalist and someone who follows First Amendment rights and the cancel culture and what we see going on. It's great to have this discussion with Professor Larry Burriss over at MTSU, and he really is. I really do respect you for taking the stand on, and I hear where you're coming from. When it comes to First Amendment, I think censorship is probably a word you don't even like to say, is it?
That's one of those words I find offensive.
Yes, I'm with you. I agree, and in general, I'm all for the open, free forum for people to get as much info as they can and decide for themselves. Let's go to Helen real quick. We'll take this phone call. She waited through the break, Professor. Good morning, Helen. Hello, Helen.
Hello.
Hello. Hello. How are you? What's on your mind?
Good. Now that they've taken his comment off on Twitter, I don't know what he said. Unless I see it, I can't believe it unless I hear it out of the person's mouth or see it. So now I don't know what he said, and I quit watching Twitter a long time ago because it was so bad. I thought I didn't want to fill my mind with all that angry stuff, so it was bad, way bad.
That's interesting. It's interesting what she says there. I mean, for a lot of folks who closely tried to follow, and this president, unlike any in the past, Twitter was his go-to, and he sure used it, President Trump. And now he's been very quiet of late, and he's probably spending his days watching this trial, but not much out there. And you wonder for folks now, with Twitter not being there, how can he communicate with him? And I'm sure there's ways. He's a man who could call a news conference tomorrow and the media would be there, of course. But what about that aspect that she brought up?
Sure. I think that Twitter and Facebook and YouTube are victims of their own success, that they have almost become like a regular utility because so many people are using those for news that they've grown so large. And I don't think when Facebook, for example, was getting started, that the folks initially had any idea of the force it would become. But since it's now so pervasive, and it's almost like you almost have to have social media in order to keep up with what's going on. So I think that leads then the social media outlets have a responsibility to give us all the news, whatever people are saying out there. Again, there are limits, admittedly, but because so many people are relying on these services, it's much like the electric company or the water company. The electric company really doesn't care a whole lot what you use their electricity for. Electricity is a necessity. Well, it's gotten to the point where social media sites are a necessity as well. And for those sites to be blocking this information or that information, that's not a First Amendment issue. As we said a few minutes ago, the First Amendment doesn't apply to Facebook, but they're violating the spirit of the First Amendment. We need to have as many voices as possible out there. And so I get a little upset when these organizations decide to block this person or that person, because that organization is deciding what the truth is. And I have a real problem with who guards the guardians here. What gives them the right to decide what the truth is? And what if somebody comes along in a few years and decides that the opinion that is being allowed now should not be allowed? Are we going to then stop that group from being heard? And now I'm hearing talk about going back to older documents, newspapers, for example, and editing those so that they no longer reflect what current opinion is. That's a real dangerous spot to be in.
And again, I agree. I wonder, just with regard to how does someone decide or not, and again, I go back to this. In general, I think that's probably a good rule of thumb, but when it comes to, just flat out lies, on a daily basis when I report, I am a guardian to some degree in terms of someone who decides what goes and what doesn't. And you'll say, well, who are you, Nick? Well, I can tell you that if I go out on a story and I have a police officer tell me that, this house, he tells me something that I know because I've witnessed it. The police officer tells me one thing, he confirms it, and there is a family member that tells me something else. And the police officer said this home burned down. The family tells me it flooded. And I can look at the house and I can hear from the police officer, it clearly burned, it didn't flood. I'm not sharing the flat out lie from the person who told me it flooded. That's where I'm making it. Who am I? No, I'm sorry. any rational individual is going to know that person's a liar, and I'm not going to use what that person told me on the air because it's clear what the truth is. And there's no wiggle room there. End of story. So it's not like, well, who am I to shut him down? I mean, he's telling me something. Well, if it's crap, I'm not going to put it on the air.
Sure. I think there's a difference between a newscast and what's on Facebook or YouTube.
Oh, okay.
Facebook or YouTube have almost gotten to the point where they are indispensable to the discussion. And as a journalist, as a reporter, you have a responsibility to evaluate what's true and what's not. That's your job. And I think the public understands that. I get kind of nervous when Facebook or YouTube are going to decide, here is the truth. And what happens again in 4, 5, 6, 10 years if they decide on a different truth? And where do we stop with the truth or not? Is Facebook, are they going to ban stories of people talking about Sasquatch? Sasquatch is not real. That is a lie. So are they going to, a silly example, are they going to stop that because it's not environmentally aware? The creature does not exist. People are making things up. So I bet we can find some biologists, environmentalists would be perfectly happy to stop the Sasquatch stories. Well, are we going to stop those? As we mentioned at the very beginning, think of all the religions out there. They all cannot be true. So is Religion X lying to us about what they believe? And if so, if they are lying, if they are telling untruths, then is Facebook or YouTube going to ban this or that religious group? Because Facebook has decided that what this religious group is saying is not true. Or this business that's promoting a particular economic theory, are we going to ban that theory, that professor, that economist, because Facebook decides that their economic theory is wrong? It's a lie. So are they going to ban economic theories next? Are they then going to go to other scientific theories? Well, pretty soon Facebook or YouTube is making all the decisions on their own for what's true and what's not. And how does the other side then, as stupid as it may be, how do they get their side out?
Yeah, it's tough. It's and the concern there is, you're right, the difference between news and the social media like that. It bleeds over though, because there's people that continually sometimes, until some of these stories have been banned on really big stories and extreme cases is what I've seen to this point, though I imagine there can be a slippery slope there. But when you continue to hear some of the stuff that's just untrue on Facebook, say with regard to the stolen election, and then I'm hearing, your news station is just not reporting on this. We get that. And we're like, well, we did report initially on some of those claims. And once it was debunked, we're not continuing to look into it because it is a moot point now. And yet all of a sudden, it's almost like the folks out there on Facebook and Twitter also blend us and throw us all in together. And it's like almost they don't understand that, at least from my perspective, I'm trying to do the best job I can to get accurate information to our viewers. You know as well as I do, a lot of the crap, and that's what it is on Facebook and Twitter, is coming from people that are just pulling it out of their butt. All right? I don't do that. I try to do the best I can to deliver it, and yet it blurs. And I don't know that that's something we can deal with, but it's unfortunate. It bleeds over and damages what we do.
Sure. Fortunately, there's Fox News, and Fox News is going to tell you that the election was stolen. So the opposing point of view is there. And if people want to watch Fox News and believe what they're saying, that's their choice. And so we do in fact have balance there. When I hear Fox News talk about how the major media are distorting and lying to us, well, Fox News is major media as well. And if Facebook wants to have a news channel and say, okay, we are going to give you now Facebook News, whatever that is, that's fine. But because they become so large, they need to allow the opposing points of view to be heard as well. And my guess is when we have statements out there, we have groups out there that are lying to us, I'd be willing to bet the only people listening to those, for the most part, are people who already believe what the kooks are saying. Most people are not listening to those anyway.
All right, let's take a call from Mr. Harold. Mr. Harold, good morning. Are you there, Mr. Harold? Harold?
Hello.
Hey, go ahead, sir.
Yes, I'm curious why Channel 2, Channel 4, and Channel 5 has banned Trump like they have done and talked about him, and you never hear them talk good about him. And that's the president of our country at that time. And why is it that Biden was able to get up there and cut him down and talk smart to him and treat him like he was dirt?
That's what I'm talking about, Professor. You know, he's got his opinion. Sure. He's entitled to it. Whatever. I don't know where he's coming from. I mean, what are you supposed to do with that?
There are conservative radio stations in Nashville, and they're going to present that opposing point of view. The opposing points of view are out there.
Sure.
You may have to look for them for a little bit, but they are there. And if somebody doesn't like what this TV station, that radio station is doing, then don't watch it. That's the benefit of a free society. You can choose. The danger is when we start to shut the channels down. And I'm seeing some thought in Washington that there are channels we need to shut down. Well, what happens in 20 years when there's a different administration and they want to shut you down?
Sure.
What do we do then?
Let's go to Taylor. Good morning, Taylor. Hi, Taylor.
Good morning, Nick, and good morning, Professor. Professor, you got a refreshing voice this morning, and I'm sure agreeing with your statements on this. I want to bring up something that I think is important that most people don't know, and it's been brought to light more in the last few weeks. And first of all, I'll say I think this cancel culture and actions are real, and there's lots of examples. But I want to get back to Facebook, Twitter, and others. Those companies are so big. Facebook has like 2.3 billion viewers. That's several times the population of the United States. And this is the point. Mark Zuckerberg had an employee that brought to light more about how they are setting up their programming and what to accept and what not to accept. Now, here's the main point. He's not making those decisions on his own. He has a group of advisors from learned folks in a lot of different countries that are advising on this. Many countries, even Western countries, have rules and laws against things such as speaking out against their leaders that will even get you jailed. And that includes England and others. So the point is, America's Constitution and freedom of speech applies in this country, but they are setting up their algorithms to be acceptable not only in this country, but in all of so many other countries that they're involved in. And it makes it a international group of rules rather than any loyalty to our own freedom of speech laws.
What do you think, Professor?
When a social platform is operating in China, they're almost required to tell the government who the dissidents are. That's not a way to operate. You know, they're doing it for money. I would think that if those companies, Facebook and YouTube, were really wanting to promote freedom and democracy, they wouldn't operate that way. They would tell the Chinese government, no, we're not going to give you the names of people who are using our service. That's taking an economic risk, but I think there are some higher principles here involving freedom and dignity. So again, the caller's absolutely right that there's an international aspect of this that we certainly can't ignore.
Professor, as we wrap things up, I mean, do you think we're going to continue to see some of this cancel culture after what was an unprecedented political race and what we've seen right now with this country divided? Or do you think at some point perhaps things will settle down and we'll get more back to that open forum with not as many people worried about being silenced?
I think the cancel culture will keep on for a while. I think there's going to be a backlash against it. There almost always is.
Sure.
When things start to go one direction or another. And we saw back in the late 60s, early 70s, it was the Republicans who were trying to stop speech, and the Democrats who at Berkeley to start were promoting free speech. Well, now it's my mind is kind of shifted the other way. Now we have the Democrats, it seems to me, are trying to suppress speech. So it goes back and forth.
Gotcha. Well, we will see how it plays out. Listen, I really appreciate you joining us today. It's good to see you, all right? And take care of yourself. Don't be a stranger. I'll have to come down someday when things are back to normal to a degree, and we'll go to the Slick Pig on me.
Absolutely. So if you're paying, certainly.
You got it, my friend. Listen, I appreciate it. Professor Larry Burriss at MTSU. It's good to have him with us. Listen, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to shift. Our final segment today is going to be talking with a good friend of mine who is behind one of the best fundraisers for one of the most important causes here. And in the pandemic, things have changed a bit, but it's still moving forward. And we're going to find a way to let you get involved as well. We'll be back with our guest and that information right after this.